"We need to open our marriage," I announced to Will over dinner. Will didn't look up. He just continued eating his pasta, his fork moving methodically, as though I hadn't just suggested a life-altering change. "No," he replied simply, barely acknowledging me. "What do you mean, no?" I felt my cheeks flush, my fork clattering against the plate. "I'm your wife. I'm telling you I'm not comfortable with this arrangement anymore." For the first time, he set down his fork and looked at me, searching my face as though he were trying to decipher some hidden message. He sighed but didn't respond, and the silence hung heavy between us. I'm Carrie, 36 years old, and until recently, I thought my life was as perfect as one could expect. I'd been married to Will for 5 years, and by most standards, we had a good marriage. Will was a kind, thoughtful man, the type who'd buy flowers on a random Wednesday or make my morning coffee just the way I liked it. We had a steady rhythm, secure jobs, a nice house in the suburbs, no major drama. We didn't argue often or even raise our voices. Everything was nice, maybe too nice. Some nights, as I lay awake in bed, I'd think, is this really it? On the outside, we looked like couple goals. My friend Sarah used to remind me of it all the time. "You and Will, you're the real deal," she'd say, and I'd smile, nodding along while ignoring the tiny, aching void in my chest. That ache I couldn't quite define but knew was there, quietly nudging me every time I saw a couple laughing or stealing glances at each other like they shared a secret. Then, one night, everything changed. The night we met Jake and Laura, it was at Sarah's housewarming party, the kind of casual get-together that promises nothing new, but ends up turning everything upside down. "Carrie, we'll come meet Jake and Laura." Sarah's voice was cheerful, her smile knowing as she waved us over to the kitchen. Jake was tall, with intense green eyes and a slight scruff that made him look like he'd just stepped off a magazine cover. He had this easy smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. Laura, his wife, was warm and effervescent, her curly red hair bouncing as she talked, her laughter filling the room. "You're Carrie and Will, right?" Jake said, reaching out to shake my hand. His hand lingered just a second longer than necessary, his touch sending a subtle but undeniable current through me. I felt a flutter in my stomach, a feeling I hadn't felt in years. Laura was no less charming. She was open, animated, a bit of a whirlwind as she shared stories about their recent trip to Thailand. Jake and Laura were different from our usual crowd, more adventurous, more alive. They spoke of late-night drives and impulsive trips, and I found myself hanging on to every word. One dinner turned into weekly game nights, and movie marathons morphed into long conversations that lasted until dawn. I found myself looking forward to these evenings with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. I began putting extra thought into my outfits, touching up my makeup just before we left, feeling a little like the younger version of myself. "You look nice," Will would say, his tone warm but oblivious to the real reason why I was making an effort. The truth was, I couldn't stop thinking about Jake. The way he'd glance at me across the room, the way his smile seemed to hold a secret just between us. I found myself replaying small moments, analyzing every word, every look, feelings growing stronger by the time I realized what was happening. It was already too late. My heart would skip whenever Jake entered a room. He remembered tiny details about stories I'd told weeks ago, things that even Will had long forgotten. One afternoon, as I sat alone at my desk, I scribbled in my journal, feeling like a teenager again. I've never met anyone quite like Jake. The way he looks at me, it's like he sees something in me that I forgot was there. And that's when I understood Jake wasn't just a passing crush. He had reignited a part of me I thought was lost. Then, one Friday night, it happened. We were on their patio, sipping wine and laughing under the soft glow of string lights, when Laura casually mentioned they were in an open marriage. My wine glass almost slipped from my hand. "It's really strengthened our relationship," Laura said, her tone light, as if she were describing something as simple as a new diet. "Being honest about our desires, having the freedom to explore, it's beautiful when done right." The entire drive home, I was lost in thought. If this worked for them, why couldn't it work for us? Wasn't this the answer to that gnawing feeling of incompleteness I felt? Presenting the idea to Will for days, I mulled over how to bring it up. I spent hours reading about open marriages, crafting the perfect argument. Finally, on a quiet Sunday night, I summoned the courage. Will was rinsing dishes in the kitchen, and I stood there, heart pounding. "Will, can we talk?" "Sure, what's up?" He dried his hands and followed me to the living room, our usual place for serious conversations. This was where we'd talked about buying our house, future vacations, having kids, all the big life decisions. I took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about our marriage," I began, my voice shaky. What if we tried opening it up?" He looked at me like I'd just spoken a foreign language. "Opening it up?" he repeated, his tone guarded. "Like Jake and Laura?" "Yes. They seem so happy, so free. Don't you think we could have that too?" The silence stretched on. When he finally spoke, his voice was edged with hurt. "So, you want us to sleep with other people?" "It's not just about sex, Will," I explained quickly, sliding closer to him on the couch. "It's about growth, exploring different connections, while still staying committed to each other. Jake and Laura say it's made their marriage stronger," I added, but his expression hardened at the mention of their names. Will's perspective, an impossible decision. I'm Will. I've always been a simple guy, quiet nights at home, a good book, and Carrie by my side. That was my idea of happiness. When Carrie brought up the idea of opening our marriage, it felt like I'd been thrown into freezing water. The next few weeks were a blur of arguments and what Carrie called honest discussions. She'd send me articles about modern marriages and evolved relationships. And Laura started dropping by more frequently, always with that knowing smile. They made me feel like I was the one being difficult, that I was closed-minded. Finally, after countless sleepless nights, I agreed. "Fine," I said one morning, watching her face light up in excitement. She practically skipped out of the kitchen, already pulling out her phone, likely to text Laura or Jake. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, ready to step into the unknown. The affair begins within days. Carrie and Jake were meeting for coffee, though I suspected it was much more. She would leave the house with a different kind of excitement, returning late with a smile that wasn't meant for me. Jake, meanwhile, was an expert at playing it cool. When we'd see them for game nights, he'd keep his distance, acting as if nothing had changed, while Laura would throw me these expectant glances, eager for me to join in. "Maybe you should give Laura a chance," Carrie suggested one evening, trying to sound casual. I shrugged, focused on my laptop. "I'm not ready." The truth was, I couldn't bring myself to go along with it. Watching Carrie pull away, night after night, was enough heartbreak for one lifetime. Guilt and reality setting in Carrie's affair with Jake became the worst-kept secret. One night, as I watched her leave for yet another work dinner, a heavy realization settled over me. Our marriage was no longer ours. I felt like a spectator, watching as Carrie's heart shifted towards Jake, feeling our once strong bond fray and tear. Meanwhile, Carrie began feeling the weight of her actions. The lies were easier now, but the guilt was creeping in, like shadows that refused to stay hidden. She would catch me looking at her, and the guilt would flicker across her face before she turned away. One afternoon, as she sat in Jake's car, he looked at her with a soft intensity. "Are you happy?" Carrie hesitated, feeling a pang in her chest. "I don't know," she replied quietly. And in that moment, she understood. She had traded one set of illusions for another, leaving her to wonder if she had destroyed her marriage, chasing something she could never fully grasp. As we lay tangled in hotel sheets with the arrangement we had, I was happy with Jake, even if I skirted around the truth. The reality was messier than I cared to admit. We had started going out more often, returning late on some nights with vague smiles and no explanations. A part of me wanted to ask where he had been, but hadn't I lost the right to ask those questions? It was a dangerous game we were playing, one that blurred the lines of our relationships and left me feeling more lost than ever. Laura, my best friend, seemed different too. She had stopped trying so hard with Will. The effort she used to put into their relationship had dwindled, and sometimes I caught her watching Jake and me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Was it envy, confusion, or something else entirely? But I pushed those thoughts aside. I had what I wanted: Jake's passionate embraces, his intense focus, the way he made me feel desired and alive. "Maybe we should all have dinner together soon," Laura suggested one day. "It's been a while since the four of us hung out." I agreed, even as a knot formed in my stomach at the thought. The lines between our lives were getting blurry. When was the last time I had a genuine conversation with Will that wasn't about schedules or groceries? When had Jake last looked at Laura the way he looked at me? Yet, I kept diving deeper into my affair with Jake. Every stolen moment, every secret touch, every passionate encounter, they were intoxicating, and I was completely addicted. I told myself this was modern love, that we were all consenting adults, and nobody was getting hurt. "I think I'm falling for you," Jake murmured one night, as we lay together in the warm light of a hotel room, his breath warm against my skin. My heart soared even as a small voice in the back of my mind whispered warnings I refused to hear. I was too caught up in the whirlwind of Jake, his touch, his smile, his everything, to see the storm gathering on the horizon. I was too busy chasing this new happiness to notice the foundations of my marriage crumbling beneath my feet. But they say ignorance is bliss, and oh, what sweet bliss it was while it bled. You know what's funny about hitting rock bottom? Sometimes you bounce back, but sometimes you just keep falling. After weeks of watching Carrie practically skip out the door for her dates with Jake, something inside me shifted. Maybe it was the night I overheard them in our backyard during a barbecue, whispering and giggling like teenagers, completely lost in their own world. Or perhaps it was Laura's constant presence, her sympathetic looks that screamed, "I know your wife is sleeping with my husband. You deserve to be happy too," Laura said one evening, finding me alone in the kitchen while I washed dishes, the warm water soothing against my hands. I almost laughed. Happy? I had been going through the motions, pretending this whole arrangement wasn't killing me inside. But something in her voice made me look up from the plates I had been mindlessly scrubbing. "There's a whole world out there," she continued, leaning against the counter, her eyes filled with a wisdom I hadn't noticed before. "And you're allowed to explore it." She wasn't wrong. And that night, for the first time, I created a dating app profile, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to prove something to myself, or maybe to Carrie. I'm still not sure. The first few dates were awkward. I felt like I was cheating, even though I technically wasn't. But then I met Lena, not my wife's friend Lena, but a literature professor with kind eyes and a quiet laugh. We talked about books for hours, and for the first time in months, I didn't think about Carrie or Jake or any of it. I felt like a weight had been lifted. like I was discovering pieces of myself that had been buried for too long. "You seem different," Carrie commented one morning as I got ready for work, her voice laced with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. "More relaxed." I just shrugged. "I guess I am." And I was. The more I dated, the more I remembered who I was before becoming just Carrie's husband. I started working out again, bought new clothes, and rediscovered old hobbies. I found joy in the little things, reading for pleasure, painting, even cooking again. Laura noticed, of course. "See?" she said with a knowing smile. "Freedom looks good on you." Unlike Carrie, who seemed exclusively focused on Jake, I found myself enjoying the company of different women. There was Lena, who shared my love for obscure novels, Emma, a yoga guru who taught me how to relax my body and mind, and Rachel, a divorced mom who made me laugh harder than I had in years. Each encounter was a reminder of who I used to be, before the weight of my marriage pressed down on me. "You're never home anymore," Carrie observed one night, a hint of accusation in her voice. "Isn't that the point?" I replied, my heart racing. For once, I didn't feel guilty about the hurt that flashed across her face. The irony wasn't lost on me. Carrie had pushed for this open marriage, convinced it would make her happier, and now here I was, the reluctant husband, actually finding myself in the freedom she had forced upon us. Then came the bombshell, at least for Carrie. Jake and Laura announced their move to Dubai over dinner at their place. As they shared the news, I watched Carrie's face crumble, saw the panic in her eyes as Jake excitedly described the amazing opportunity, the salary package, the lifestyle they'd have. Carrie sat there, looking like someone had pulled the world out from under her feet, as if she was trying to process what it all meant. "Are you okay?" I asked her later that night, more out of habit than genuine concern. "They can't leave," she whispered, her voice trembling. I realized she wasn't talking about them as a couple. She meant Jake, her Jake. The next few days were strange. Carrie walked around like a ghost, checking her phone constantly and having hushed conversations with Jake that ended in tears. Meanwhile, I felt lighter, as if I could finally see our situation clearly. I was no longer tethered to the weight of our marriage. Will caught me before their final dinner with us. "I'm sorry about everything," he said, his voice tinged with regret. I just nodded. What was there to say? Her husband had been sleeping with my wife, and somehow through all of it, she'd helped me find myself again. On the night Jake and Laura left for Dubai, I sat in our backyard nursing a whiskey, contemplating the strange turns life takes. Carrie was upstairs, probably crying, but for the first time in our marriage, her tears didn't make me want to fix everything. "This isn't what I wanted," she'd said earlier, her voice small and broken. "No," I replied, feeling stronger than I had in months. "This is exactly what you wanted. You just didn't expect me to want it too." And that was the truth. In trying to break free from our marriage, Carrie had actually freed me. I just don't think either of us expected me to be the one who'd learn to fly. "We need to close our marriage," I announced to Will over dinner. He continued eating his pasta, not even bothering to look up. "No." "What do you mean, no?" My fork clattered against the plate. "I'm your wife. I'm saying I'm not comfortable with this arrangement anymore." Finally, Will looked up, his eyes hard. "Let's be honest for once, Carrie. You wanted an open marriage for one reason, to hook up with Jake. You had him lined up before you ever brought it up to me. And now that he's off to Dubai, you want to close shop? I'm not a switch you can turn on and off at will." The truth in his words stung. "That's not fair." "Fair?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You know what's not fair? How you and Laura tag-teamed me into this whole thing. Don't think I didn't notice how it was all arranged beforehand. Fine. I slammed my hands on the table. I'm not comfortable with you seeing other women. It stops now. Or we're done. I played my ultimate card, certain he'd cave. Will had always given in to my demands eventually, but he just smiled. Okay. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I'll have the divorce papers drawn up tomorrow. Panic clawed at my throat. I'll tell everyone how you abandoned our marriage, I threatened, desperate now. How you chose random women over your wife. What do you think your precious Emily will think about that? Will calmly pulled out his phone and tapped a few buttons. My own voice filled the room. Please, Will, just give it a chance. Jake and Laura make it work so well. I need this. We need this. Another recording played. Will's being so stubborn. Laura, can you talk to him again? Make him see how good this could be? I've got dozens of these, Will said quietly. Every manipulation, every pressure tactic, every time you and Laura double-teamed me into agreeing. So go ahead, try to ruin my reputation. See how that works out for you. I crumpled into my chair, defeated. I hate you. No, Carrie, you hate yourself. He was right. 6 months later, I was still hating myself. Every date was a disaster. Either the women were nothing like Jake, or worse, they reminded me of Will. Last week's guy spent the whole evening talking about his cryptocurrency investments, while the one before that lived with his mother and needed a ride home. My therapist says I'm experiencing the consequences of my actions. I call it karma. Every morning, I wake up alone in my overpriced studio apartment, scrolling through dating apps, trying not to look at Laura's Instagram posts of their perfect Dubai life or Will's photos in my old house with his new girlfriend, living my old life. I got what I wanted. Freedom to date whoever I wanted. Funny how it feels more like punishment than liberation. Maybe you should take a break from dating, my friend Sarah suggested last week. She was the only one who still talked to me from our old circle. But I can't stop, because stopping means sitting alone with the knowledge that I had everything I needed, and I threw it away for a fantasy that went up in smoke the moment Jake boarded that plane to Dubai. They say you don't know what you've got till it's gone, but that's not true. I knew exactly what I had, I just thought I deserved more.